All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started here, and I want to say welcome to GovCon Roundup, episode 5. Today we're going to be talking all about AI, and so this is going to be the focus of our topic today. We want to really talk about several aspects of AI in federal contracting. Our goal is to really help you guys as contractors try to wrap your head around what's going on with AI right now in this space from a policy perspective. So we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of executive orders and some legislation that has been proposed. And then we're going to be talking about some do's and don'ts of AI. So that way you guys will be able to navigate it in the right way, but also do it responsibly, but also as well what not to do. So today I'm joined by Mr. Stephen Koprince, former federal attorney specializing in GovCon, and now he continues to work with us as an instructor and a legal analyst. We're also going to be joined by Ms. Pamela Isom. I wanted to read Pamela's bio because I know a lot of you guys know Stephen already from a lot of our webinars that we do and some of our other episodes as he's the co-host. But I'm also excited about Ms. Isom joining us today. She's actually the founder and CEO of Is Advice and Consulting LLC. Her firm specializes in AI governance, cybersecurity, and digital infrastructure modernization. With more than 25 years of experience, Ms. Isom is a former senior executive at the U.S. Department of Energy and the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, where she led national security initiatives in AI strategy, risk management, acquisition oversight, and the protection of mission-critical systems, including secure spectrum allocation for wireless communications. Ms. Isom is a certified AI auditor and keynote speaker who guides organizations in innovating responsibly through AI leadership, governance-aware red teaming, and secure modernization without the burden. Pamela, I'd like to welcome you here to the show as well today, and also welcome Stephen. So thank you guys for joining us.
Great to be here as always, and I'm excited to be in here with an expert. You've heard me talk a lot in previous sessions, talk at you about different rules and regulations and all that sort of thing. And this is not my area of expertise, so I'm excited to learn today as well from Pamela.
So again, welcome everyone. I'm really excited to have Stephen with us to talk about some of the policy that we have seen so far, as well as some legislation. And then Pamela's an expert in this field, and she works with contractors on a regular basis. So I'm really excited to pick your brain as well, Pamela. And again, this is really going to be an episode about a lot of the do's and the don'ts out there, some of the policy, but really trying to make sense if you're a contractor that is either looking to bring an AI solution into the government. There's some things you're going to need to know and navigate, but also even if maybe your solution is not AI, but you are using it in the pursuit of contracts and the performance of contracts and the administration of contracts, there's some things that you're going to need to know. So we're really just getting started here inside of this AI world, but it's really already going. So I also want to encourage everybody to really embrace AI. I know that there's risk with it. We've got to acknowledge these things, and there's some bad things that can happen about it. And this is why we're here today. Really, a lot of the discussion is going to be around AI governance and what has been put forth in policy by the government and then retracted. So, Stephen, let's start with you. So in 2003, President Biden put out an executive order on AI. And then later that year, we saw a bill proposed. I think it was later in that year. There was a bill proposed on the FAIR Act, which was all about really taking the executive order and basically trying to put that into policy in the way that I read it. Fast forward, that bill didn't get passed from what I could recall. And then now the Trump administration in 2025, earlier this year, that executive order was revoked. So can you give me the breakdown on that from your perspective of what you're seeing from these two executive orders, the bill that was proposed, and where do we stand now with all of this stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give a quick overview, and then I'd love Pamela to weigh in as well to the extent she has comments on this, because obviously it affects what she does on a day-to-day basis, and she may have some more insights as well. One minor correction, just a little slip of the tongue there. He said 2003 is actually 2023. 2003, I believe, was George W. Bush. And if you'd asked anyone in 2003,
that's good memory, man, right there off the top of your head.
2003, the idea of an AI writing a novel or
making
something
sure you were
was like
paying
total
attention.
science fiction. But yeah, so 2023, then President Biden issued an executive order called Safe, Secure, and Trustworthy Artificial Intelligence. It was a lengthy executive order built on a previous document that they had issued called Blueprint for AI Bill of Rights. It was a fairly comprehensive executive order trying to get the administration's arms around what's a very rapidly developing technology, as we know. And so that really had a breakdown of kind of 8 areas of focus for the federal government, which included safety and security standards. You already talked a little bit about that, Carroll, about how this is, we all know, is an amazing tools that are being developed, but there are security risks associated with it in terms of the planet itself, maybe, and also in terms of privacy of information, things like that. And that was another focus of this executive order, was protecting privacy rights. How is AI going to interact with the workforce and the labor force, and taking a look at how that was going to play out in the years to come, and how we might look at how is AI going to impact the job market, that sort of thing. International relations were a part of that executive order in terms of trying to keep American company and the American government at the forefront of AI and not rely on outside sources, because that, of course, it can be a national security risk. Ensuring effective and responsible AI governance. And then, of course, the one that probably got the eye of the Trump administration was a piece on advancing equity and civil rights. And so they use the E word, the equity word. And so there is going to be, of course, whether you support that or not, that is something that was in the executive order that likely caught the attention of the Trump administration, which has a different perspective on what they call DEI initiatives. And so when that administration took over in January of this year, the Biden executive order was revoked, along with a whole bunch of executive orders that were issued both by President Biden and by previous presidents as well, but especially by President Biden. Now, that doesn't mean that the Trump administration is just saying we're not going to do anything with AI. They had their own perspective about how to proceed. And concurrent, or right around the same time as the repeal of that Biden order, the Trump administration published a new executive order called Removing Barriers to American Leadership in Artificial Intelligence. And that was back in January. And that was implemented, or at least kicked off the implementation of the Trump administration's AI policy. And what it did was it called for the creation of an AI action plan, solicited feedback from stakeholders, industry groups, private sector, government agencies, and said 6 months, we want to lay out an AI action plan to accelerate innovation, ensure American leadership again, and meet some other policy goals of the Trump administration regarding AI. That came out then in July. And so in July, that AI action plan was published. It was meant to, quote unquote, achieve the president's vision of global AI dominance. We want to be the global leaders. They received 10,000 public comments in developing this plan, and makes over 100 policy recommendations regarding accelerating the innovation, building infrastructure, and maintaining that world leadership in AI. I should mention the bill as well, so I'll mention that in a second separately. But right around the same time as that AI action plan came out, President Trump then signed 3 executive orders that were related to that action plan. One of those executive orders dealt with directing federal agencies to accelerate development of projects that would essentially lay the infrastructure for increasing use of AI and leadership in AI in the world. And then there was a second piece of it dealt with exporting AI technology and how the administration believes that should be handled. The one that probably is going to get the most attention from the procurement community, the export one certainly will for those who have overseas sales, was the one that would then tied back to this administration's view on DEI, as they would call it, or the equity pieces of the previous executive order. And this Trump executive order is called Woke AI, Preventing Woke AI in the Federal Government, which it is what it is. This is not an ideological podcast. Some people say that's exactly what we should be doing, and others would say it's not. But regardless, it is what it is. This is out there now. But what this is, an executive order that says federal agencies can only procure AI, the LLMs, that are objective and free from top-down ideological bias. And it basically says there are 2 big picture principles we want any AI system the government buys to keep in mind. And one is truth-seeking, respond truthfully to requests for factual information or analysis, while prioritizing historical accuracy, scientific inquiry, objectivity, and maintain ideological neutrality. And so do not manipulate responses in favor of ideological dogmas. And the executive order gives some examples, which, depending again on your point of view, some will say we're cherry picked, some will say we're just examples that are emblematic of a problem. But saying, hey, someone Googled and wanted a picture of the founding fathers at the Constitutional Convention, and it came back with a mix of genders and races and such, it didn't represent historical accuracy. And so we don't want that according to this executive order. So that's where we are, where we stand with that. Last thing I'll mention, I do want to hear you, of course, Carroll, and from Pamela especially, because this is something I just follow mostly as a layperson and somebody who likes to read legal stuff, and not as an expert. But there was in 2023 and again in 2024 a bipartisan bill. It's introduced in both House and Senate called the Federal Artificial Intelligence Risk Management Act. And what that essentially was, a bill that would require both federal agencies themselves and federal contractors, vendors, to follow what are right now guidelines, AI risk management guidelines that are put out by NIST, that's the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Again, it was bipartisan. It was introduced by my senator, Jerry Moran, my former senator, Mark Warner, from different parties. But as far as I'm with you, Carroll, as far as I understand, that bill, while it was introduced in both chambers and had support of members from both parties, has not been approved by Congress. And we're going to be done with this session of Congress at the end of the year here and into a new Congress in the new year. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, one of the things I wonder about, Stephen, with this, because that came right after that proposed legislation came during the Biden administration, right after the executive order. Do you see this getting passed under the Trump administration? Because if it had some of those priorities from the Biden executive order built in, which are no longer the priorities, where does that leave the bill standing now?
Yeah, I think the bill, and I want to hear from Pamela on this since I'm not the expert, but one of those policies that was put out there in the Trump executive orders and that AI action plan was essentially to have some tweaks under the NIST standards themselves. So I think that once those standards are tweaked to the administration's satisfaction, then you might see the administration support a bill. This is just my guess as a kind of a layperson policy watcher, because you've got two layers. You got the legislation, then you got what the legislation does, which is say follow these standards that are put out there by NIST. And so if you can get an alignment between those standards and what the administration wants to see, that seems to me when you'd get the administration support for the bill. And as it stands, that's probably what would be holding something like this up, given that the president's party does control both chambers, albeit especially in the House on a narrowly right now.
We're going to go to Pamela, and I wanted to just mention, as I read into this, from what it looked like, that the Biden executive order pointed to the proposed legislation, which if it would have been passed, it would have mandated that contractors at least have an attestation that they are following the NIST AI risk management framework. But Pamela, maybe you could tell me more about that. As of right now, it's still voluntary, but this kind of like the hub of where all of this is. And what this reminds me a lot of, for those who are familiar with CMMC, CMMC basically points back to a NIST standard, especially CMMC level 1, where it's kind of like a self-certification or attestation that you are basically following all of the guidelines and frameworks of this NIST standard. So now we have AI coming in with another NIST standard. So what are your thoughts, all of these policies Stephen discussed, and where things stand as of now, and what advice are you giving to contractors that are maybe looking to bring an AI solution into the government? What should they be preparing for?
Yeah, so that's a good question and a complicated subject, but we'll try to help make it sensible here.
Yeah, probably could be a whole webinar series, but give it to us in 5 minutes.
It's a complicated subject, but here's the thing. So for me and my organization, I'll just use myself as an example. We know that the recent legislation and the most current legislation under the new administration is very focused on innovation. They're very focused on not stifling innovation. They want the U.S. to dominate, and they don't want to stifle innovation. So they talk a lot about governance, but without burden. So organizations get confused on what does that mean if we are going to introduce less burden. I think I have three things here: innovation, infrastructure, and international diplomacy and security. So if you think back to the previous administration, they had similar concepts, right? They just emphasized more how to get there. So make sure you're paying attention so that you're not introducing harms. Make sure that you're focused on equities, because those inequities is what attributes to harms. I can say that I was a part of the first Trump administration executive order on AI, where they talked more about trustworthiness. And then it talked a lot about trustworthiness. Equity was in there. All that was in there in the first one. For this latest one, the recent executive orders, they get to it, but in a different way. So here they're talking about Americans need to dominate when it comes to AI, and how are we going to get there? We're not going to spend a whole lot of time zeroing in on burdensome policies and regulatory requirements, although we know that's needed. So the way that I read it is we know that's still needed. We just need to figure out a lean way to get there. Now, that's the way I choose to look at it in my organization, because we're going to stay ethical, right? We're going to do all the things that we know we should do. I think the NIST risk management playbook is still applicable. I think the framework is still applicable. I think we should look at it. It speaks to the life cycle. In my organization, going through the life cycle the other day, because we're building some AI solutions, and we were going through the life cycle, making sure that for every layer within the life cycle that we're looking at where are potential vulnerabilities. Because how do we mitigate the risks associated with those vulnerabilities? We don't need the legislation, the executive order to tell us that. We know that we need to do that. But we can crosswalk it back. I can crosswalk that back to the legislation, because we want our innovations to be sustaining. They want our innovations to be sustaining. If we emphasize a few things a little bit more, you probably heard me talk about trustworthy speed, right? So they talk about speed. The administration speaks to speed. Hurry up and get something out the door. Fail fast. They don't call it that, but the executive order implies that, right? So do it, but do it swiftly. And we say trustworthy speed. Speed we can trust, right? So within our organization and with some of the folks that I'm talking to. So I say try to remember what was in the executive order from the Biden administration. Definitely remember that. But try to look at how to bring that forward and tie it to speed and dominance. So how can we take some of those same principles and practices and then tie it to what the new administration is really after, which is don't stifle innovation. Now, I'm not going to talk about this woke stuff because I don't even know what that means. Like, I have no idea, really. I don't know what that means. I don't know where that came from. But what I can say is I want solutions to be fair. I want ethics and equity and integrity demonstrated in our outcomes. So we put test processes in place to ensure that's happening, and we make sure that governance is in place. And they do emphasize governance. They're not anti-governance. They just emphasize a lot of less bureaucracy. But we know that we have to practice common sense. And back to the NIST framework, if you look at the NIST risk management framework and their associated playbook from back, it was originated back during the first Trump administration, I think. If you look back at it, and if you look at some of the current things that they're doing, it's still all about safety and risk mitigation.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think we should omit it. I just think we figure out a way to do it with an eye on repeatable processes, with an eye on innovation, and just bring that innovation more out front, and don't ever set ethics aside. No way.
Yeah, that's great. A couple of things that you said kind of makes me think of something with regards to everything we're talking about. Because if you're looking at the executive orders and the revocations and this back and forth, again, what sits at the standard is this NIST AI risk management framework. And I think that you were an SCS within the federal government. And just because it's not mandated that contractors go out and implement and attest to this at this time, I think it's still important that they can look to this document, because each individual agency, just because it's not mandated, doesn't mean that you might not see a solicitation where they're going to be asking you some questions. And I've seen some of these solicitations already where they're asking questions. They're encouraging contractors to use AI for efficiency, but they're also wanting to understand how they're using AI. So I think it's important to understand the framework and to have a look at the framework is to provide some kind of a guidance, because this is what's at the core. And I think it's what really all of the federal agencies had started to coalesce around when they are trying to adopt their own internal strategies, whether that be within the DoD or the Department of Energy. Is that kind of accurate there?
Yeah, so yes, I agree with you, and it's a good point. So there's a couple frameworks I'll reiterate here. So with the NIST, you got plan and design, collect and process data, the build phase, the verify, And testing is integrated throughout. At least for my organization, that's what we say
Mhm.
is we're testing and integrating throughout. You've got the deployment, so verify and deploy, and operate and monitor. So if you think about CMMC, which you mentioned earlier, CMMC concepts of security by design. So just overlay that with this methodology. You're trying to figure out how to ensure that we are integrating security by design. Look at this life cycle. Look at the AI life cycle. This is the life cycle. It truly is. And build it in from the onset. So you're not just looking for the vulnerabilities, but look at how do you build in security from the onset, which is what we are calling security by design. And then you overlay that with how we'll think about zero trust. So when should we trust whom with what? And from an AI perspective, I'm caring about what kind of data is going to be navigating through our systems. What's that data going to look like when it first enters, when it's raw, versus when it gets to an end user? And how is that data traversing? So what we're doing is we're building in, and then the framework speaks to the CMMC does not necessarily call out AI, but you can apply everything that's in there to what you would do with an AI solution, whether you are using it from a contractor perspective. If you're a contractor, you're not necessarily building an AI solution, then you should feel comfortable using AI to make your processes better and more efficient. Use AI to make your own processes better. Do not give it FCI information. Do not give the AI models contract information. Do not, right? So remember to not do that. But that doesn't mean that you can't use it. So the things that we know that we should do not give it CUI information. Hold that within your own. So sanitize your data. Now, the models are intended to allure us into giving it more information. So that's where you have to be a good AI steward. So you have to know when it offers to provide this and this for you. If you just provide us with this, we'll use information that is not real. Don't give it your contract numbers. Don't give it your award numbers. And don't give it PII information. Watch what you're giving it, right? Because it aggregates information. So you give it your name, your address over here, and then you turn around and give it some more information pertaining to your award over here, and it pulls information together. It's retaining information. And there goes your information that is released that you don't want released, because there's a possibility for data leakage. So I hope I answered your question, but you can see where I was trying to help you see where CMMC is applicable.
Yeah.
I'm a contractor and I'm trying to do work for the government, and I'm wondering whether I can or cannot use AI. I say yes, we can, but just be careful with the information that we share with the models. Even if the models are internal to our own organization, which you can do, you can make it to where it's internal. Check those controls. Go back to CMMC and check those controls and see what it's saying as far as what information you can share with whom and how, and then apply those controls.
Yeah, and that's a really great point. And the way that I look at this is that you're going to really have two types of contractors out there. Those that are bringing the AI solutions, which are going to have to go through a pretty rigorous process if they're developing AI software for an agency. First layer, you're probably going to have the CMC right there. Like, I think about it like a layer cake. It's like CMMC right there at the base, but then you're going to have the AI risk management framework on the top of that. And the more risk, of course, that's associated with the project, the more it's going to probably get scrutiny. And then you're going to have another side of the contractors that are not necessarily bringing the AI solutions in, but I think that this was what you were alluding to in some of those most recent comments that you mentioned with what you don't want to put into the AI, because we're seeing contractors that are using AI in all phases of their procurements, from the pursuit phase. They're like using it for market research, for proposal development. And of course, if you've got some classified information or even personally identifiable information like employees' names and security numbers, you don't want to put that stuff in AI. You can use some of the proposal software the right ways, but you also have to understand those systems as well. You have to understand the systems that you're using. How secure are they? Where is the data going? So as you're looking, so from one perspective, the contractors that are building those systems, even for the GovCon industry space, needs to be explaining the security that they've got built in. But as a government contractor, I know that people are using everything from ChatGPT for proposal writing all the way up to systems that were developed specifically for writing government proposals with more of the security built into it. And so then we have the contract administration side. What are you using AI for to basically manage your contracts? And there's a lot of confusing out there. So I know that we're going to be doing more topics on this. And the good news is I had a conversation with Pamela on Monday, and we're going to be doing a monthly series just to talk about this, as well as having her come in and do some training with us next year to really, for those of you guys who are wanting to navigate that, whether you're building an AI solution for government, or you're just trying to figure out how to use AI in the right way in your GovCon pursuits and contract administration. We're going to be talking a lot more about all of those topics. So in that context, I want to turn first now to Stephen, and then we'll go to Pamela on what contractors should avoid. So we've already seen some things. If you're following any of the LinkedIn, I know, Stephen, you've posted some things, you've commented on some posts where we've seen contractors use AI in protest situations, and they were threatened with sanctions. And can you talk about some of the things that you should avoid that you've seen people already running into, kind of potential landmine, maybe not a landmine, but they don't want to.
It could be.
Yeah, so
it could be figuratively,
Right.
not the actual exploding kind, but one that explodes figuratively for your business. Yeah, I think the first thing really gets to what you and Pamela were talking about, which is taking information and putting it in an AI system to have that system use it and process it in some way for you. And of course, my background is I'm not practicing law anymore, but my background is a lawyer. And one of the things that contractors need to be thinking of when they're engaged, not just with the government directly, but with other contractors in a joint venture relationship, in a teaming, prime sub teaming type relationship. Now we're seeing pop up, and this is how it should be, provisions in those agreements that specifically address the use of AI. Because typically when you have a teaming arrangement of some sort between two companies that are both in the government marketplace, they're both in a highly competitive industry, and they tend to have, if they're doing it, anything close to best practices, some sort of non-disclosure agreement between them. That may be a separate NDA. It may be baked into a teaming agreement or subcontract, or all the above if we're really belt and suspenders type people. But typically it says, here's the definition of confidential information, and usually it has a pretty broad definition of all the data that we're going to exchange regarding preparing a proposal or performing a contract, or both, other than what might be subject to release because of the following, and a list a few exceptions. Those exceptions have not usually been like, and you can put it in ChatGPT, and then ChatGPT is going to scrape it and put it out there in the world, or whatever it's going to do with that information later. And so what we're seeing is folks who are writing these NDAs, especially with the advice of attorneys who are wise to the ways of the world in terms of advancing AI, they're putting in restrictions in NDAs, in teaming agreements, in subcontract agreements regarding how the parties can use AI. And so one thing to keep in mind, depending on your position, is if you're the one who is tasked typically with the first draft of those agreements, which typically in a prime sub relationship is going to be the prime, although sometimes when the prime is a small business and the large is a sub, it's a sub that wants to. But whoever is sending the first draft of those agreements, is proposing the agreement, you probably need to at least be talking to your contracts people and your attorneys about how should these be amended, if at all, and they probably should be, to address AI and AI disclosures of information. The flip side is, if you're used to getting these agreements, you're maybe a small business, you're used to receiving teaming agreements, NDAs, subcontracts, even joint venture agreements, and not really looking for this stuff. You give 2 minutes to look over a standard NDA, you're like, it looks pretty standard, and you don't realize that in signing it, you waived your right to use AI, because that agreement now has a clause added saying you can't use AI in the preparation, or you can't put any information that you get from us in the AI. You can't use it in the preparation of the proposal, or here's how you can use it, or you can only use this tool, whatever the case may be. So you have to be wary of contractually limiting your own ability to use AI, or whether that needs to be a matter of negotiation between you and your teammate. If you're used to using a certain platform and this teaming agreement would prohibit it, or your subcontract would prohibit it, that needs to be a discussion before you sign on the dotted line, or you've just kneecapped yourself. Your choices are either do things the old-fashioned way or different than your way that you'd priced into your budget to get this done, or breach your agreement and risk getting sued. And so that's one thing to keep in mind in these negotiations. Using AI as your lawyer. Don't do it. Maybe in 10 years or maybe even in 5, I would have different advice. But we're seeing folks who are trying in the government space now to use AI as their lawyer. And that doesn't mean that AI can't be a help. Attorneys are using this to help them do legal research, to help them get started and make more efficient starts to agreements, things like that. But what we've seen, and you refer to this, Carroll, for example, is folks going to file a bid protest at the GAO, Government Accountability Office. And instead of hiring counsel, which would be the wise choice, because you don't have to, you can represent yourself. If you can afford an attorney, my opinion, again, is not a please hire me because I don't do this anymore, but my opinion is if you can afford an attorney, it's a legal process. Hire someone who's an expert to do a legal process for you. I just blogged on a case in which someone who represented themselves and made like 3 key procedural errors that may have tanked their own protest. So anyway, the point is they go to and they try and get AI to write their protest for them. There were at least 7 reported cases out of GAO this year in which that happened, where someone who didn't have an attorney tried to get the AI to write their protest, and then the AI hallucinated citations, made up cases and laws that don't exist, and cited them to the GAO, which the GAO said, hey, we know our own cases and precedent pretty well, and this stuff doesn't exist. And so GAO was put out there now saying anyone who signs a protest to the GAO, whether you're attorney or not, you are responsible for the accuracy of the citations in it. And if you're citing precedent that doesn't exist or citing cases for principles that they don't stand for, that's on you, and we can dismiss your protest for that alone, no matter how meritorious it was. Now, in several of these cases, they gave the protester kind of a warning but didn't do it. But in the more recent one, they actually went ahead and dismissed the case and said this is a hallucination. And I will say in that case as well, the protester didn't seem to have much sorrow for having done this, didn't really apologize for it. But really, even if you're going to represent yourself, you have to then take what the AI presented to you and hand check it. You got humans beings got to check that those cases exist and that they say what the AI says they're going to say. And so you can, again, use the AI to help you in legal processes, but having it be your lawyer is not a thing that is a good practice. The final thing that I'll say is 2 related points, is using AI for compliance advice, government contracts compliance advice. Again, it's a tool that you can use to help you research compliance advice, but it's not a lawyer. And so I have tested out various ChatGPT and Gemini and various systems, just typing in government contracting legal questions, and sometimes the answer is right and sometimes it's way off base, just depending on where the AI is getting its information. So you just can't take that stuff to the bank. It can be good. It can be a good tool, can help you get started, but it is not necessarily something that you should take as 100% truthful, because the AI can hallucinate, it can make mistakes, and it's only as good as the information that's input. And the input it's getting in a more niche area like government contracts is not necessarily extensive enough that it's always going to be able to separate out the junk from the good stuff. And keep that in mind that when it's looking at authoritative sites, some of the ones that you might deem most authoritative, like government websites, for example. And then the related point of that is agreements, like joint venture agreement. You think, I don't need to hire a lawyer to prepare a joint venture agreement. I'll just get AI to do that for. Like an SBA mentor-protege joint venture agreement has 16 mandatory provisions that have to show up in that, and it actually varies depending on whether it's a small business set-aside you're going after, like an 8A contract. You miss just one of them, your joint venture is invalid. That's not an AI type thing that I would trust an AI to write it. I put that into these systems too and said, draft me an 8A compliant joint venture agreement and just leave blanks where I might need to fill in the information. And it was nowhere close. Now, I was able to get it closer by giving it more hints. Please follow very closely the rules at 13 CFR 124.513B or whatever. And then it'd be like, okay, and then it would get closer, but you have to know a little something to do that then already about the law. And by that point, so again, it could get you started, but if that's what you want to do, you still need to, because AI misses just one of those mandatory requirements for you, and if someone files a protest, your contract's going away. So that's my 2 cents on some of the things I'm seeing on the kind of legal-ish compliance side on government contracts. I'm not in like the proposal writing world. I've never been there, so I'm not the best one to speak to that. You may be better on that one, Carroll, but on the compliance side, that's where I see things right now.
Yeah. We'll go to Pamela. Pamela, what have you seen? I will mention, I was actually at a conference out in DC last week and met some really nice guys. They work for a company called Cletus, and this is a new proposal writing software. And even they were saying, you have to have good content that you're putting into this tool in the first place. So it's not going to basically just be like, write a proposal for me, look at this solicitation. But they're seeing contractors try to do that. And then they're calling them like, hey, why is this not working? You have to really have good data. It's like garbage in, garbage out in a way. So if you're not really giving it any good input or any good guidance in terms of like maybe a previous proposal that you used, and also again be mindful about what you're putting into that system. And I wouldn't encourage anybody to just take a complete proposal, but maybe do it in chunks. I haven't used any of the proposal tools yet, but Pamela, what have you seen from your perspective out there where contractors are starting to go into a red area that they should really work to avoid?
I think they overcommit. So when you use tools like AI, and this is what I've seen, you really do have to check, because what happens is you overcommit as to your capabilities, because the tool is there to say what it thinks you want to hear. And so by that, it tells you that you're so wonderful and you do this, you do this so well, and this is your expertise, right? And you're just loving it. They're just loving it. And then they make a commitment that they can't stick to. So that's one area that I've seen. I actually have seen this. Of course, me running my own company, I'm monitoring for this within my own team. So as my team, as we are working on proposals and we use one of the tools and we ask it for some advice here and there, watch very carefully when it comes back for a suggested proposal that you can make. Be sure that you can actually deliver, because it will add stuff. It will. The other area is in the area of not just taking your information that you give it, but sharing your information. So it does share your information. It does. It shares information is going out to data brokers, information just getting leaked, and it's shared abroad. So what I don't see enough is the diligence around how do we protect our privacy. I just don't see it. I just don't see it. And it's not a cybersecurity thing. It is a responsibility thing. We should take responsibility for how do we safeguard our information and protect our privacy. Now, I'm sure there's some things that maybe we don't care about. I'm the kind that I'm not one for posting pictures out there of my family, my loved ones. I'm just not. But if that's your thing, that's fine. But be careful with government information or your friends' information or your co-workers' information. So I think we should be a little bit more protective of our information, not just our own, but our colleagues. And I still see issues there where we think we want to relegate that responsibility to a privacy SME or a cybersecurity SME, and it's not. It's our responsibility. That's an area where I see now. I think that where I see good things is using it to help establish baseline, but don't make that your contract. So what are some of the key things that should be included in a statement of work? Because you need a statement of work, even if it's you need a statement of work with government, but you need it also with your subcontractors, right? So if you've got contractors working with you, you still need to have a statement of work so that there's an agreement of the work. And again, be sure that you don't overpromise or overcommit. Those are the two main areas. I think that for education and training, using it, I've seen a pretty sensible use for establishing education and training content, as long as you don't leave it there, right? If it comes up with this proposed curricula, make sure you go through it. So I still have this caution. Be sure we go through the content and it's something that we can perform. So that's really where I'm seeing it. I will say that data lineage is always on my mind, and how we keep track of data that we feed the models, and are we understanding the outputs and how it's actually using the data. And so there just needs to be more work. But I just think if we have a mindset of understanding the traversal of the data and the use of the data, I would never use it, like what Stephen was saying, I would never use it to establish a legal document for me. That's not my legal document. I don't even like calling AI my companion. It's not my thing. You're not my companion. So I think we just need to be really careful with that. And the reason why I don't see it as an issue anymore is because I think we're getting better. It used to be a time when I would hear people say, it's my companion, so I just rely on AI for everything. What it tells me, I do. I'm starting to see more stewardship around that, so I don't see that, because I have real issues with calling it a companion, just because I just don't think the word fits. So I think we're getting better at that, but I do agree with Stephen in that we don't want it creating legal documents for us and saying that this is the document. I've had some customer service experiences where I'll say this and then I'll stop. I've had some customer service experiences, and I think I am going to contact these folks and say, you know what, I think you should hire me. So here's what happens. As an example, customer I contacted a vendor about something, and their agent wouldn't let me through to a person. And I was like, I want to talk to a person because what I'm dealing with is complicated. It had to do with moving and different things. And it just wouldn't let me through. And so I ended up making this big mistake, like booking an appointment and having somebody scheduled to come out to my home to pick up something when I wasn't quite ready for them to come. And they were going to pick up something, but not everything that I wanted them to pick up. And so I ended up calling 4 or 5 times and finally got through to an individual. And I told them, like, okay, so like this wouldn't have happened if the agent had been able to get to a human, and this would have been settled. And so I understand that we want, from a customer service perspective, that we want the agents to really handle the situation. What I don't see, where I see the opportunities and where I am going to talk to this particular company, but it's happened more than once, is where is that human interception? Where should it be and how? Like, just because a person says, I want to talk to a human being, okay, maybe not, right? But when? Or do we just say, do I just call somebody and I say, I don't want to talk to an agent, I want to talk to a human being today. Should I pass it through? Like, where is that escalation? And when that should be tailored to your business model. And so that's where I see the opportunities. Those are the kind of things that I see that I'm dealing with. And those are the types of issues that I think we have opportunities to improve.
Yeah. The other thing that I want to do is I want to really encourage folks to really dive in. This technology, to me, this is just my personal belief. It's like the invention of fire, and it's going to be such a game changer to the world. I do believe there's going to be probably bad things that will happen with AI, just like what's happened with the invention of fire, but also good things that's going to happen. It's going to radically transform the way that we do business. I really believe that, based upon conversations that I've had with people in GovCon, people are sitting on the sidelines, I think, a little bit too much. I think that they really need to jump in. They really need to educate themselves. This is why I had a conversation with Pamela earlier this week. We're going to be doing a monthly meetup just like this, all on the topic of AI. For those of you guys who want to use it, worry about some of the contractors that are not employing the AI tools into their business, that they may be left behind. They may be disrupted as their competitors start to align it. They're finding more cost savings and more value that they can produce to their end customers. And we know, especially with federal government, most of the procurements are all about best value. So I can see a lot of people being able to use AI to bring that best value solution in the future. And one of the positive aspects of it, as well as I see the ability of small businesses to be able to leverage AI responsibly, to be able to do things that they never really could do before. You just didn't have the bandwidth as like a 2-person or a 5-person company. And so I think what we're seeing is that as the big corporations are laying people off, and I think we're seeing them laying people off a little bit too soon without actually keeping the human in the loop, and then bad things are happening. I see small businesses being able to now leverage it to actually do more and to even probably add more people to their team through the things they're going to be able to utilize. So while we talk about some of the cautionary tips, I just want to let everybody know that really we're all on board 100% here in our company, and we're moving forward, but we're also wanting to do this in a safe and responsible way. We're building some AI tools to enhance our educational platform, and I'll be working with Stephen and Pamela and as we develop our own tools to make sure that we're doing it in the right way. Because at the end of the day, regardless of whether there's a law that says this is mandatory, you've got to follow this or not, you really should look into that guidance, because at the end of the day, it's all about trust, I believe. And when your client is asking you, how are you using AI? You need to be able to explain to them and be transparent to them about the way that you're using AI, because business happens at the speed of trust. And that's the thing that we'll end on. But I wanted to recap some of the things that I took away from our conversation today, outside of the legislative back and forth, beyond that, I think that there's 5 things. I've wrote those down. Is number one, know the rules. So as these rules develop, keep yourself apprised of this and make sure you understand what is compliance. And that's where Stevens had his whole career. Some of those will be in regulation, but some of those will be in the internal agency's policy that you're going to be doing business with, whether it's federal or state or local. Everybody's going to start to develop their own policies around this to mitigate their own risk. And a lot of them will probably be looking to that NIST framework and other frameworks. We didn't even get into it, Pamela, but I know that there's other frameworks that we could also point to inside of this. I think the second point here is to know the tools. So what tools are you using? For example, if you're using ChatGPT, that tool right there, if you're using a free version, they will use the data you put in there to train the models that's going to go out to other people. If you're using a paid version, not as much. But they're basically all the tools that we use now are building in AI. You see them, Microsoft, Google, Canva, Zoom. So where is the data inside of those tools? So that's what I mean by know the tools. What are the capabilities that you can use and leverage within those tools that are already being built in with AI? But how are those tools being used and how are they connected to other tools that we don't want the data going out to maybe foreign adversaries where the governments do not let the data go this direction? The other thing I took away is to protect your privacy as well as the privacy of your clients. And so don't put in a client's data into a system that you don't know anything about and you haven't communicated to them on how you're going to be using that data. So make sure you're doing that. Maintain a human in the loop. Right now, we can't just blindly trust AI. So maintain a human in the loop means that if you're using AI to produce a document for you or anything like that, maybe you do use your AI tool to put together a bid protest, but don't just throw it out to GAO. Take that to your GovCon attorney and say, hey, here's what our situation is. I put this document together, but maybe that will save you some hours of time. Maybe that'll save you a little bit of money, but let the expert be that in reviewer on that if you are not. And then the last bit is just to keep yourself informed by engaging in continuous education, but also encourage each member of your team to learn about this as well. And I know, again, we're going to be having more sessions on this with Pamela and other folks about the education that you guys will need out there to keep yourself informed as business owners, but also you're going to want to be able to educate your team on the proper usage of AI and be able to set policy for your team and your own internal guardrail. So anything that I missed to that, Stephen or Pamela?
Pamela?
I think that use cases are important. The organization should think through what use cases make the most sense for their organization and honestly develop an AI strategy. And I think if we can think about that and make it really simple, it doesn't have to be overly complicated, but what's our strategy? What do we want to use AI for? What does it make the most sense? When does it not make sense? Because we all should be using it. If a client asks me today, how am I using AI? And I say, I don't, that's a red flag.
Yeah, and I think I would just go back to the point you made, Carroll, about small businesses and how AI can be a tool to help level the playing field a bit. I think it's every bit as groundbreaking as the internet. Think about how that has helped countless entrepreneurs and small businesses level the playing field against the behemoths in their field. I'm an example of that. I started a small law firm that competed with larger firms in the government contracting space, and I couldn't have done that without the ability to get to reach a national audience through blogs and newsletters and things like that. I would just be a random dude at that point. I think AI is going to be every bit as groundbreaking in terms of offering those opportunities to ethically and wisely take advantage of those tools to level the playing field somewhat for small businesses, for startups, for entrepreneurs who are willing to jump into the waters and maybe compete in a way against established businesses that they maybe couldn't have effectively done before.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much, Stephen and Pamela, for all of the great tips and advice. So with that, Stephen and Pamela, thanks again, and we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Bye.
All righty. Take care.